Today I have the distinct pleasure of introducing John King, who will say a few things about his inner world. And I would like everybody to welcome him.
I can virtually guarantee you this will be the most unique colloquium that you have this year. Because George was nice enough to give me still not quite sure why, but when I look at some of the things that you guys are studying, stereoscopy with neural network hardware, I think, wow, I don't even know how to spell some of those words. So George didn't tell you a lot about me and where we know each other from. Let's see if I can make this thing work. There we go. George and I have known each other for a long time now, since 1971. And where I first met George was at the University of San Francisco. He was a professor of computer science, and I was there studying to get a degree, which I completed in computer science in 1975. As I thought back about computer science in 1975, there is no question that I am a dinosaur. When I look at this list, it makes me feel like I'm worse than dinosaur. But in any case, I thought I would... the other thing about me is that I worked in the field of computer science, so to speak, for 1 year after I graduated from college. Even though I thought I would be a computer scientist forever, it just didn't work out that way. And so I wanted to, since I couldn't possibly share any useful information with you about neural networks and those kinds of things, I wanted to talk a little bit about what I've done with a background in computer science for the last 35 years and sort of how it's affected my life. Because I think virtually everything that I've done in the interim, although it hasn't been strictly computer science, relates to that degree I got and what I learned back in those days. I'm sorry I can't get any further away from this thing than this, because that's as far as the mouse will go. But let me just remind you what was going on in 1975, 100 years ago. You know, that was the end of the Vietnam War. Tiger Woods was born, for God's sakes. I mean, that's ridiculous. Most of you probably don't even know what the Rockford Files is on TV. The other thing that I was just doing a little research that it was sort of interesting back in those days, the economic times were a little bit different than what we're experiencing today. I wish I could buy gas for 44 cents a gallon. But the thing I found sort of most interesting was that there were bailouts going on back in 1975 that didn't even occur to me until I had done a little research, that the government had bailed out the city of New York for a grand total of $2.3 billion, so they didn't go bankrupt in 1975. I thought that was pretty interesting. I don't remember that. I do remember 44 cent a gallon gas, but only vaguely. What was going on in the world of technology in 1975? Oh my God, the world has changed dramatically, right? Motorola patents the first mobile phone in 1975, something that everybody in this room, you know, is part of their life daily, I'm sure. DVDs were a twinkle in somebody's eye, but Betamax and VHS were duking it out for the dominant technology in that world. The Cray supercomputer was being introduced. There were 2 commercially available microprocessors on the market then, but they really weren't part of our world in 1975. The first package system was the Altair 880 that came to the market that year, and there are 2 guys that you've heard of that built a basic system for that computer. And that was the year that Mr. Gates and Mr. Allen trademarked the name Microsoft. Steve Wozniak joined a computer club over there in Berkeley. And perhaps more importantly, the world's first disposable razor was brought to the world in 1975 by the folks at Bic. And you say, well, what about Apple? Well, the Apple I didn't come along until 1 year later. So 1975 was sort of a different world. We were in the era of mainframe computers that looked a whole lot like, I don't know, I went backwards. It looked a whole lot like that. The first computer that I worked on with George at USF filled up a room about twice this size, raised floor. It was an RCA Spectre 7046. You know, when I think back, it was sort of intriguing that that system had 256K memory. It had 6 whopping disk drives that were each 20 megabytes. We used to, I worked in the computer center on Friday nights as an operator, and we used to keep our beer under the raised floor because it was the coolest place in the university. So now here's something that I had just sort of blocked completely out of my mind that probably you've never seen. Punch cards. Oh my God, anybody ever seen something like that? I can remember, we had these key punch machines sprinkled liberally around, and every time we went to program something, we would buy a deck of cards at the bookstore and pop them into the key punch and punch up your program that would then get read into the computer, and if you dropped your deck of cards, things were bad. We had a bunch of dumb terminals that people addressed funny, but these were the devices that we used to interface with the computer online. I don't know if you noticed, this was paper tape. If you thought punch cards were bad, you should say paper tape was really bad. But you'd key up your program and it would punch it onto this little sheet of paper tape, and then you'd load it into the computer. Things were great in those days. And we used some really magnificent programming languages that I don't know if anybody uses these anymore. George was the Wizard of Algol at USF. I certainly remember taking his class. And obviously we use BASIC, but it's not the visual BASIC that you folks are used to today. The other thing that we had that I don't think exists anymore, or at least I haven't run across it lately, is the whole world of time sharing. And this was all sort of driven by the fact that we had very large, limited capacity computers that were very slow, extraordinarily expensive, not particularly reliable. I remember the computer that we had at USF came armed with a technician. We had a little office for this guy in the corner of the computer room, and he sat there every day just waiting for something to break. And he was not the Maytag repairman. He was a very popular guy. Things were breaking all the time. So, it was a very interesting time, and I sort of thought the world was going to be like that forever. But obviously, in 35 years, things have changed a great deal. Okay, let's see what I do now. And back in those days, I had 2 jobs when I was at USF. I earned the princely sum of $2 an hour for being a teaching assistant. Was I ever one of your teaching assistants? I might have been for a semester or 2. And then I worked for another fella who I actually programmed for it. And he paid me the princely sum of $4 an hour because he always wanted my attention. He says, I'm going to pay you twice what you're making as a teaching assistant because whenever I want you, I want you. And I want you to, I want you to think about what you're making. So that $4 an hour actually changed my life. Not because it gave me date money and that kind of thing, but because the guy that I worked for was an entrepreneur. He had his own computer company, and he became a mentor to me. And in addition to paying me $4 an hour, he had a big influence on the rest of my life. And actually, my junior year, this gentleman came to me and he said, John, you know everything you need to know about computers right now. You should get out of computer science and go into business. And I thought, that's the most ridiculous advice I ever heard. That guy doesn't know anything. And I ignored him, but continued to program computers for him. And in hindsight, that probably would have been good advice if I had listened to it, or at least part of it. And so that is one of the things that I wanted to chat about with you today. Was not that I want to give anybody in this room advice to say, hey, get out of computer science, because I think computer science is a great field, but I want you to think about computer science and how you might use the skills you're acquiring today as you go into the future, and what other skills might you acquire while you're here to go along with your core computer science skills that might put you in good stead as you move ahead. And then, anybody here sports fans? The other thing I'm going to brag about the University of San Francisco back in the good old days. In 1975, very briefly, for a week or two, the University of San Francisco basketball team was ranked #1 in the nation because we had a very weak conference and we won all of our games. Then, of course, as soon as we got to the playoffs, things were not so good. But I'm a big sports fan, especially a big college basketball fan. So I wanted you to remember the good old days at the Hilltop. This was before they sent all of our players to prison. You remember those days, right? So I got out of computer science with a degree in 1975. Life was great. I had a real job, which pleased my parents no end. And I was convinced that I was going to program computers for the rest of my life. And it just didn't really work out that way. Wait a second, I went too far. How do I go back? I hate these things. George, there you go. So I went to work for a computer manufacturer with the thinking that I was going to program computers, like I said, for the rest of my life, solve all their problems and whatever. And as I worked there, I noticed there was only one other person in the office that worked as hard as I did. And lo and behold, he was the most successful salesman in the office. I was there every night till 7 or 8 o'clock. He was there every night till 7 or 8 o'clock. And it didn't take me very long to figure out that he was making a lot more money than I was. And I figured I was probably every bit as smart as he was, so maybe I should try something different. And with the encouragement of my father-in-law at the time, who thought being a salesman was the most honorable profession in the world, I decided that I was going to stop programming computers and I was going to sell computers, which I did for 5 years. Made a lot more money. It was a lot of fun. Met a lot of interesting people doing a lot of very interesting things with computers. And that was great. And ultimately, probably would have done that forever, except working for a big company back in those days. It was one of those things that you had an opportunity to, if you wanted to move up, you had an opportunity to move. And so I was given the opportunity to move to Eagan, Minnesota, or Bluebell, Pennsylvania. Real garden spots. If you like snow, it's the place to be. And I said, you know what, that's not really for me. So then I thought back to my friend who had paid me that princely sum at USF to program computers for him, and I said, you know, that guy was an entrepreneur. I've always wanted to do that. And so I started a software company. And I did it with 3 other guys. And I did that for 20 years. My mother, every 6 or 8 weeks, would call me up and ask me when I was going to get a real job. But it lasted for 20 years, and blessedly, we did it modestly successfully. I had 3 partners in crime. They didn't let me write any programs. They figured I was the sales guy, and they were worried every time I actually got around the computer. But we did that for 20 years, and I'll talk about what we did a little bit later. Was lucky enough to actually sell the company, which was a great thing. After 20 years, I was kind of tired of doing the same old thing. And once, the world's a funny place. Once you sell a company, everybody says, well, you must know something about how to do that. And so I got into the world of investment banking and helped other people raise money and sell companies and do all that. And I did that for 6 years, and that led me to one of my client companies, which was in the world of aviation, just down the road from here. And I helped a fellow that I had known for a long time sell his company, and through a long, circuitous set of events, we decided after we sold that company, we'd start another one. So we started another aviation company 5 years ago, and that's what I've been doing for the last 5 years. So it's been sort of a circuitous route with that BS in computer science. Very little of it having to do with what I thought it was going to be, and I'm still trying to figure out what it is I'm going to do when I grow up, or what the next adventure in life is. But that's how I got here. I've had a lot of fun coming on campuses around the state, talking to groups like yours. Although I have to say, this is the first time I've ever talked to a computer science class. I almost always talk to a business class. So you're going to have to bear with me. All right, onward. So what are the things that I would like you to think about because I think about them as I look back on my career, or at least consider as you're getting ready to migrate to the outside world. The first thing I would like you to consider is you are in a great field to become an entrepreneur. And being an entrepreneur, if you have the temperament, can really be a lot of fun. If you're going to become an entrepreneur, the second thing that we'll talk about a little bit is investors, which you're going to need some money for your company, love technology. It's a great space to be in. If you don't want to be an entrepreneur, computer scientists can add a great deal of value to just about every business undertaking. And I think that's one of the things that I see everywhere I go is folks that have backgrounds like yours, how they can really contribute to what a company is trying to accomplish, or any undertaking. It doesn't have to be a company. Technology can be used as an offensive weapon. I'll talk about a couple of companies that I've been involved with over the years that have done that. And then the last thing I thought about is, and maybe you've discovered something, but when I was at USF and got this degree in computer science, I always said, well, if this is a real science, there ought to be laws or theorems or axioms or something. But when I left USF, I don't know what any of the laws of computer science were. So I've been collecting them over the years, and so far I've come up with 4 laws of computer science. That's the part of the meeting you'll want to take notes. It is very, very important. That was a joke. Okay. Lots of entrepreneurs in the world of computers, computer science, and technology. And what I tell people is, I think entrepreneurs are born, not made, although maybe that's not the case. But there are some people in the world that are best suited to sign their name on the back of a paycheck every 2 weeks. And there are some people in the world that are best suited to sign their name on the front of a paycheck every 2 weeks, and or a group of paychecks. And it can really be fun if that works for you. One of the greatest entrepreneurs of our time that I always think of when this subject comes up is Mr. Jobs at Apple. I think what he's done is nothing short of brilliant, and I think he's a great thinker about the art of what's possible and the art of how to package things up. I just can't tell you how impressed I am, and I wish I had never sold my Apple stock a few months back. I think beyond temperament, there are some skills and capabilities that entrepreneurs would benefit from. I'm not sure that you can teach innovation and creativity. I think I'm one of the least creative people in the world, but entrepreneurs don't have to be entrepreneurs alone. They can have partners. I had some really creative partners that I worked with when I had my own company. If you're a person that has a great sense of the customer, what people want, what people value, what people are willing to buy, I think that is a great ingredient for being an entrepreneur. Obviously, some technical skills in the area of finance and business administration and those kinds of things are invaluable. And I'm guessing, having taken a brief look at the catalog for this fine university, that some of those skills can be acquired here. And I don't know how many of you have taken a business class. Like I said, when I was at USF, that was about the least appetizing idea that somebody could have laid on me, and I never did, but in hindsight, I wish I had. And the other thing is, if you think you are a persistent person, somebody who's sort of willing to work through every obstacle, maybe you are cut out to be an entrepreneur. So there are a number of resources that are available to entrepreneurs or budding entrepreneurs that you might want to think about taking advantage of. We talked a little bit about some classes outside of computer science. I'm guessing a bunch of you have outside jobs to support your habit of attending the school, and that was the greatest experience of my life, was working all during college. And certainly there are startup companies in this neck of the woods that would value your expertise and would be a terrific opportunity for you to learn from folks that are trying to get things done. The whole world of entrepreneurship is so important in the overall economy of the country that the president has started his own initiative, and I wouldn't be surprised. Is there anybody in this room that's already an entrepreneur, that's already built something or sold something? You know, for folks that have already sort of jumped into the pool, there are a bunch of organizations that can provide mentorship and advice and guidance to help you with your endeavors. Does Sonoma State have a business plan competition? I don't know. I've been involved with a business plan competition for the last, off and on, for the last 6 or 7 years at Berkeley. You know, if you have an idea, that's sort of a fun exercise to go through, is to write your idea down, put it in the form of a business plan, and they have a contest, and they assign mentors to every team. And I don't think you actually even have to be a student there to submit your idea. So it's you know, it's sort of a fun and interesting opportunity. One of my teams came in second one year. They won $10,000 to try to put their plan into business. I don't know that ever came to pass. Investors love technology. Building a business takes money. As Walt Disney here says, that, you know, money is one of his biggest problems because he needs a lot of it to make things happen. There's lots of sources for capital if you have the urge to start your own computer software business or technology business or whatever. Obviously, you can win the lottery, you can take out a second mortgage, you can beg from your friends and family. There's obviously professional money. The company that I built, we actually just bootstrapped it, which is fairly common in the world of software and technology, where you build something for a particular person on a consulting basis, and then retain the rights to the technology and ultimately turn it into a product. I have a very good friend of mine now that just he spent 3 years of his life helping Intel convert from SAP version 7.3 to 8.2 or something like that. It was a $300 million project that the company undertook, and in the process of helping them map out that change process, he built a software system to help define and expand on the change planning process, which he now has turned into a product, and he's out selling to consulting firms. And there, you know, obviously there's professional money, strategic investors, and there's angel investors out there. Just to give you a sense, when you look at the world of investing here in the United States, and I'm sorry how small this slide is, but this is how much the totality of investments in companies in the fourth quarter of 2010. So we're talking about $5 billion that was invested in companies, and if you what I did was just go through here and in the yellow say, all right, well, how much of that was in the areas of technology, the areas that you folks will probably be participating in as you leave Sonoma, and about 40% of that investment is in those fields, not even counting medical devices and consumer products, which have lots of computer technology embedded them, and semiconductors and that kind of thing. So there's huge amounts of money being invested in this space, and you're in a great place to do it, because a very large percentage of those deals, I'm sorry, that's not a very readable slide, but this is just the history of investment quarter by quarter for the last 4 or 5 years, and as you can see, you know, 35–40% over time is invested in California companies, and large percentages that are in the world of software. So I would encourage anybody that has an entrepreneurial itch to think about scratching it. It's a great thing. How many of you have seen the TV program Shark Tank? Everybody knows what we're talking about. Shark Tank exists. It exists not quite as fancy and with as much flair as they do it on television, but there are at least 6 groups that exist here in the North Bay that, or the Bay Area as a whole, that fund investments in much the same fashion that you see on Shark Tank, where somebody will come in and pitch an idea and look for investors. And if it's if this is something that is of interest to you, I know any of these groups, you could call them up and say, hey, I'd like to just come and watch the process sometime, and I guarantee you it would be an educational experience. Yes, ma'am.
What's an angel investor?
An angel investor is typically a non-professional person who's reasonably well-to-do, has the money to invest in a small company or some kind of a venture, but doesn't do it in a professional way like a VC firm.
Okay, thank you.
So, like I said, if this is something that you're sort of intrigued by, I'd call one of these groups and say, hey, I just want to come watch, see what it's like. Okay, skipping on. So yeah, that's what I was just going to say. It gives you access to some potential investors. They provide resources, and they give people feedback on their ideas. Okay, I told you I'm a sports nut. Baseball season starting. I hope we have some Giants fans in the room. Spring training's coming to an end. I just want to throw in a picture so that anybody who was falling asleep would wake back up. I want to talk to you real briefly about what I call technology as an offensive weapon. I think there are all kinds of ways that lots of different companies can use the technology that you're familiar with to advance what they're doing. I've had the pleasure of working with some of these folks over the last 35 years. And most people sort of don't quite think about the world this way. Visa, the credit card company. I think almost everybody in this room probably has a Visa card in their wallet of one kind or another, a debit card or credit card or whatever. These are the guys that started it all. It's the most successful card brand in the world. I had the pleasure of working with these folks for 20 years when I had my software business. A couple of years ago, they had what at the time and may still be the most successful IPO on Wall Street. They raised $18 billion in one day. That's pretty impressive. And what most people don't understand is that Visa, the company, doesn't issue any credit cards, because Visa is an organization that does 2 things. They make rules about how the card can be used and what the card has to look like and what the color blue has to look like on the card. And they provide a systems infrastructure between the banks, because the banks are the ones that deal with the card holders. You get your card from Sonoma Valley Bank or Wells Fargo or whoever, and the merchants are the ones that they deal with banks as well. And so what Visa has done, and really the core of their success over the years has been, they've done a good job with the rulemaking, obviously, but they have implemented technology that has revolutionized this industry. The card technology itself, they've been instrumental in creating the Mag Stripe card and the smart cards that are starting to come into existence today. They built an incredibly sophisticated worldwide network to link all their banks together to authorize transactions. Back in 1975, when I first had a Visa card, you used to have to put the card into a machine. The machine had to have a piece of paper that went over it, and they rolled the thing back and forth. And then if the merchant looked at you and they thought you were a little funny, they'd reach under the counter and they'd pull out a thing that looked about the size of the phone book, and they'd open it up to see if your card was listed. And that's how they decided if your card was any good or not. It's been a long time. Visa, was basically the organization that put an end to all that. And so they've built technology in each one of these areas that, in a very real way, made the brand what it is today in terms of, everybody in this room knows exactly what to expect when they use their Visa card. And it's largely because of the technology that these guys put in place. And if you go to Visa, and they now occupy 4 buildings down in San Mateo at the intersection of 101 and 92, they probably have 1,500 employees at that location, and I would venture to say that 1,400 of the 1,500 are folks like you. So it's very much a technology-driven organization. Another group that we don't think of as a company, obviously, but another organization that I had a chance to work with over time was the San Francisco Police Department, and they were unique and sort of trendsetters back in the early 80s. They had a terrible problem with how quickly they could respond to phone calls, 911 calls. And so they were one of the first to implement an integrated online computer-aided dispatching system for their officers. So they put terminals in all the police cars. They integrated the computer system with the 911 phone system, and they used it to improve the efficiency of their department. In addition to improving efficiency, they were also looking at trying to enhance officer safety. So the computer system was ultimately enhanced to provide history about what went on. So when a police officer arrived at a particular location, he knew what might have happened there before. He had real-time access to information about vehicles, and the system kept track of police officers in terms of how often, when was the last time I heard from that guy, and what was he doing, and if I haven't heard from him for 10 minutes, maybe it's time to send somebody else out as a backup to make sure he's okay. And then collecting all that information about every event that they responded to, they ultimately used that information to optimize their staffing levels, because obviously Friday nights, you need a lot of policemen in certain parts of town, and Tuesday afternoon at 3 o'clock, things aren't quite as hopping. So, it's another example of an organization that went out, brought in some technologists, and said, we have a problem to solve, and there must be ways that we can do this better. And then the folks that I work with today, I don't want to bore you too much about the aviation world, but our business is lock, stock, and barrel, driven by software that has been built by folks like you. Virtually everything we do, from tracking where our airplanes are, how they're maintained, planning our trips, mitigating the risk on those trips when there are situations like lousy weather today and those kinds of things. Everything about our business is driven by computers. And if you actually look inside the flight deck of one of our airplanes, there is very little in that flight deck that isn't microcomputer based. Some really amazing technology when it comes to flight management systems and air data computers, and obviously the whole world of GPS navigation. You're used to it in your cars and with your newbies and the like. The level of accuracy that we get with the airplanes technology is astounding. Plus, it now gives us the facility to get more direct routing and save fuel, which is no longer 44 cents a gallon, as you well know. So in each one of these cases, companies and organizations have looked to people just like you to say, I have a problem, how can I apply this technology to solve my particular problem? And as I've done that over the years, I found it to be a lot of fun and very satisfying. Okay, we're going to skip through some of this stuff because we want to have a little time for questions. This is the last thing about my favorite time of the year from a sports point of view, right? NCAA tournament. Giants start playing. Augusta. Nothing better than Augusta. All right. So we'll conclude with John King's laws of computer science. And you can disagree or agree if you want. But as I think back over 35 years, what do I know for sure about computers and technology? And I've come to the conclusion that distributing data is almost always a bad idea. Distributing processing is almost always a good idea. Software can only be designed with one purpose in mind. I learned this from one of my business partners, who was a very smart guy to this day, and he always used to say, John, when you write a computer program, you can only do it with one objective in mind. You can say, I want to write the world's most efficient computer program, and that's great. I want to write a program that's easy to debug, and that's great. I can write a program that's easy for somebody else to maintain in the future, and that's a good thing. But as soon as you tell me you're going to try to do more than one of those things with a computer program, you're lying to me, was what he always told me. And so I've decided he was right, and that's one of the laws of computer science. And I've now, 35 years later, come to the conclusion that generally efficiency is the wrong objective for a program. And then another one of my business partners, although I'm starting to have doubts about law number 4, he told me way back when, you remember this, nobody in this room knows what a green card is, but in an IBM mainframe computer, they had something that was called a green card. It was basically maybe 4 inches by 8 inches, and it had a couple of folds, looked like a trifold brochure, and everything that you needed to know about an IBM computer was on that card. That was like the Bible. That was your cheat sheet to write any kind of computer program. You remember those? Oh yeah. Oh yeah. And my partner always used to say to me, he says anything that can be summarized in a green card, there's no way that can be intelligent. So he always says, artificial intelligence is an oxymoron. Although, what was the name of the computer that just beat all those guys on Jeopardy? Watson. I'm starting to think rule number 4 is in doubt. So I just throw those out for fun, for something for you to think about. So I think we have about 6 more minutes. Anybody have any questions, comments? Ready to? Yes, sir.
So you're saying like distributing data is a bad idea. So what do you think of like cloud computing and stuff like that?
I think cloud computing is a great idea. In fact, my company we have one in-house application and everything else is cloud computing. So okay. In terms of relocating data someplace other than in your closet, I have no problems with that. Oh, okay. My notion is distributing data in the sense of I'm going to take this same information, especially dynamic information, and I'm going to put it in a bunch of different places, and I'm going to do something really clever to keep all those places in sync. Okay. That's a bad idea. My humble view of the universe. I've never seen it done well. I'd be happy to be proven wrong. Over the years, back in the old days when I was working with the folks at Visa, one of the things they wanted to do was to take that, remember I was telling you about that phone book that had all the cards listed? Well, ultimately they built a database that had all that card information in it. Those were the bad cards, right? If your card was on that list, your card was lost or stolen or whatever. And telecommunications technology back in those days was not at all what we have today. And so, if you wanted that information distributed around the world, Visa's solution was to take mini computers, put mini computers out in every bank, and distribute that file and keep it up to date dynamically. Great theory. Could never make it work. Something was always out of date. Something always was wrong. I think the database world has improved dramatically since those days. There's no question in my mind about that. But I still think distributing data and trying to keep everybody in sync is an extraordinarily challenging undertaking. And if I was going to design something, I'd probably try to avoid it. Sir?
You've talked about how you like being an entrepreneur and that there's a lot of opportunities for people who know technology. Do you think, or could you talk a little bit about how you feel that your training as a computer science helped your business sense or helped you do that? I mean, what I'm curious about, I find that a lot of people, or a lot of groups I look at, or other things like politics and stuff like that, they don't understand the concept of if then else.
Yes, very well put. Very well
They're
put.
very illogical, and it bugs me.
Oh, I'm telling you, you should go take a couple of psychology classes. He's exactly right. There's a lot of people out there in the world that I've never heard it so succinctly. They don't understand if then else. That's exactly right. But to go back to your question, I think that what your training in this realm gives you is, obviously, I think you come at things from a fairly logical perspective, sort of the if then else, maybe not if then else so much as, very process oriented. First thing we have to do is this. Once that's done, you have to do this. Once that's done, now you have the information you need to do the next step. I think that mindset, if you will, is very useful and not universal in lots of other worlds. And so I think that's one of the things that someone with this kind of background and training brings to an organization is the systems and process orientation. And like I said, I think of myself as an entrepreneur, but I also think of myself as a very uncreative entrepreneur. So I tend to surround myself with people that I think are creative. And creative folks have these great ideas, but are kind of okay, I'm going to jump there. And as you're all coming to learn, jumping there is not all that easy. Usually to get from here to that grand destination, there has to be a series of steps, each producing an intermediate result or intermediate knowledge or whatever you need. And I think that, I find that particularly valuable in the business world, if you can help a company come in and establish a process that allows them to do whatever it is they do well, repeatably, and scalably. I think that's sort of a key wiring that comes out of this world. One more question anybody have? Sir?
Your work in the current company is as a consultant?
No, I'm the president of Solairus Aviation. Anybody else? I appreciate you putting up with me, and I hope that you get back to something more meaty in 2 weeks. So thanks.